Kennica Jenkins, who was 19 years old at the time, was getting ready to make plans to go out with her friends on the evening of Friday, the 8th of September, 2017. She was going to go out with her pals. It was the kind of night that seemed to be full with potential that had not yet been realized. The kind of night that many of us remember from when we were that age. An invitation to a birthday party had been made to Kennica and her 3 friends, and it was not any ordinary party of any type. Kennica and her friends have been invited to attend. The Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare Hotel, which had an aura of refinement and a touch of glitz, was the location of the event that was being conducted. They were all overjoyed and happy. To get to the hotel, which was located in the neighborhood of Rosemont and was in close proximity to the airport, they got into their vehicle and drove there. The hotel was located in Rosemont. While they were driving, they were laughing and talking about the night that was going to come, and the lights of Chicago offered a backdrop that was familiar to them. Around 11 o'clock on that particular evening, they arrived at the parking lot of the hotel where they were staying. As soon as they discovered a parking spot, they got out of the van and made their way into the lobby of the Crowne Plaza, which was a well-lit area. If we were to claim that the atmosphere was typical of a hotel that was filled on a Friday night, we would be understating the situation. In addition to checking in and going to the bar, there was a steady stream of individuals coming and going during the whole day. The group of friends that Kennica was with made their way to the elevator and then proceeded to rise to the 9th floor before arriving at their destination. Room 926 was the location where the event was held. As soon as they opened the door to the room where they were staying, the celebration had already begun in full swing. There were a significant number of people, including friends and friends of friends, who were jammed into the small hotel room despite its limited space. At the same time that people were dancing and the music was playing at a loud volume, beverages were freely passed from one person to another. As they had anticipated, the setting was brimming with life and vitality, which was exactly what they had brought with them. Kennica and her friends joined in very quickly when the news broke. There was a whirlwind of music, laughter, and conversation, and the hours began to blend together and became less distinct as the conversation continued. When Kennica arrived at the party, she was drinking, much like a large number of other individuals who were there. As the night went, it became increasingly apparent to a few of the other individuals who were attending the party that she was becoming quite intoxicated. This was the case since she was getting more and more drunk. At one point, when they attempted to give Kennica a hug, they discovered that she was so unsteady on her feet that she was unable to stand up on her own. Later on, a witness who was present at the moment provided this information to the detectives who were conducting the investigation. Another witness recalled seeing Kennica after some time had passed, and they both recalled seeing her. While the most of the people were standing up and dancing around in reaction to the music, Kennica was sitting on the edge of the bed, which was situated off to the side. Kennica was taking a seat on the edge of the bed. It appeared as though she lacked the stamina and coordination required to even stand up, let alone dance, based on the manner in which she held herself. The mere act of sitting there gave the impression that she was unable to deal with the quantity of alcohol that she had ingested. It has been a couple of hours since that earlier time. It was sometime about 3 o'clock in the morning when the event took place. The celebration was beginning to wind down when Kennica and the 3 friends that she had brought with her to the party came to the conclusion that it was time to call it a night and head back home, despite the fact that they had been celebrating for quite some time. After saying their goodbyes to one another, the 2 of them made their way through the bustling area and then exited onto the corridor on the 9th level, which was quite calm on that level. As the 4 of them made their way down the lengthy corridor in the direction of the elevators, the hotel's security cameras would eventually record them as they made their way down the corridor. After a long night out, they gave the impression of being any other group of young people that they could have been of any other age. All the way down to the ground floor where they exited the elevator, they were transported by the elevator, which brought them all the way down. Following their departure from the building, they entered the main lobby, which had grown noticeably less boisterous in comparison to the time when they had initially arrived. Just as they were beginning to make their way towards the main door, Kanika suddenly came to a complete and utter halt. She had the intention of heading out to the parking lot and locating their vehicle. At first, she was checking her pockets, and then she checked her handbag. She was getting ready to leave. When she gazed at her face, she gave off the impression of being confused. Nevertheless, she was devoid of the keys to her vehicle. In addition to that, she was unable to place her cell phone anywhere in the vicinity. She took the time to explain to her pals that she must have overlooked the people who were still present in the establishment. They were able to establish control of the situation, despite the fact that Kanika was substantially more intoxicated than her friends were at the time. When they shifted their attention to Kanika, it was clear that she was having trouble standing and keeping her head in an upright position. They told her to come to a stop and wait in this location. Ensure that you continue to be present in this very lobby. We will have to return to room 926 inches in order to find your stuff for you. We apologize for the inconvenience. At first glance, it seemed like a basic approach. The moment Kanika gave a little nod, her companions turned around and headed back in the direction of the elevators, leaving her to be by herself in the lobby. The group of her friends returned to the party room, which was situated on the second story of the building. First, they spent a few minutes searching the disorganized room for her pocketbook, and then they finally found it. On the other hand, they were not successful in their exploration. Both her cell phone and one of her keys were discovered inside the house. It was clear that they had been successful in achieving their goals. After leaving the party for the second time, they ultimately made their way back down to the lobby in order to meet up with Kanika. They did this with a sense of relief before leaving the party. Nevertheless, there were no people present in the foyer upon the opening of the elevator doors and their departure from the elevator, because he was no longer present. They looked around, considering the likelihood that she had most likely just gone outside to get some fresh air. They were thinking about this possibility. Upon exiting the primary door, they proceeded to explore the surrounding region and take in their surroundings. It is not true, she was not there. Currently, it seemed as though they were not really concerned about the situation. After some consideration, they arrived at the conclusion that she must have become exhausted from waiting, and as a result, she ultimately chose to walk out to the car by herself. The three of them began going through the parking lot till they found their vehicle. This was done in order to locate their automobile. Nevertheless, Kanika was not there when they got at the area where they were waiting. In addition to the fact that she was not inside the vehicle, she was also not standing in any geographical vicinity to it. Suddenly, a glimmer of worry started to creep into my consciousness. I was concerned about something. The fact that their buddy was incredibly intoxicated, in addition to the fact that it was the middle of the night, left them completely confused about where she was. In addition, they were in possession of her phone, which meant that they were unable to even call her in order to inquire about her location. Teresa Martin, Kanika's mother, should be approached as the next logical step, according to the conclusion that they reached via their investigation. After taking out their phone, one of the pals called the number that had been provided to them from the list of available numbers. When Teresa picked up the phone in the middle of the night, she was immediately overtaken with a feeling of dread. This feeling occurred very quickly. As a result of the physical distance that separated them, the voice of the friend of her daughter who was on the other end of the line sounded peculiar. The events that had taken place were described in detail by them. They informed her that they had just left the party that was held at the Crown Plaza after they had left the party. Because Kanika was unable to find either her phone or her keys, they had left her in the lobby so that she could go look for them. This was done so that she could go and find them. After returning to the ground, they were unable to locate her anywhere in the area. Teresa was given the assurance that they had her phone and keys and that everything was probably fine, but they were unable to locate Kanika. Teresa was offered this assurance. Teresa's thoughts seemed to be racing at a quick pace. It was a straightforward inquiry that she addressed to them. Were any of you drinking any alcohol? A little lull occurred in the conversation that was taking place on the other end of the line. Both of the friends gave off the impression of being anxious and guarded. The situation was minimized by them, and they replied something along the lines of, "Oh no, maybe a drink or two." They continued to go on and on about how certain they were that Kanika was doing well for herself. However, when it came to Teresa, her instincts as a mother were screaming that something was horribly, extremely wrong. She was concerned about her daughter. Despite the fact that it was 3:30 in the morning, her daughter had not been seen for a considerable amount of time, and her friends were completely unaware of her disappearance. The fact that she would be arriving to the hotel on her own was something that she shared with them. At some point in the future, she was going to recover her children. Teresa Martin came at the Crown Plaza Hotel at a time that was quite close to 5 o'clock in the morning. The sun had not yet risen at that precise instant in time. She entered the tranquil lobby with the idea of locating Kanika, and she did it with a single, unwavering goal in mind. The first thing that she did was to go right to the front desk, and this was the first thing that she did. An explanation of the issue was provided by her to the manager who was on duty at the time. She shared with him the news that her daughter, Kanika Jenkins, had been present at a party that was situated on the 9th degree. It was stated by her that her companions had discovered her in this very same lobby the last time they saw her, but that she had disappeared since that time. Although Teresa made an effort to keep her calm, it is clear that she is in a desperate state of mind because of the tone of her voice. However, despite the fact that I am certain that she is doing well, we are unable to find her. Due to the fact that her friends have access to her phone, I am unable to get in touch with her. Would it be feasible for you to take a brief look at the footage that was captured by your security cameras in order to figure out where she went? We are unable to determine if she has left the hotel, or whether she is still present somewhere within the establishment, or whether she has departed the hotel. Viewing the video footage is all that is required of us at this time. It appeared as though the request, which was made by a mother who was experiencing fear, was reasonable. The personnel at the hotel, on the other hand, was completely and utterly unyielding in their refusal. She was advised by the management that they were unable to share her with the footage that was captured by the protection system. His point was that it was against the policy of the hotel to show a film to a guest who had not yet filed an official report with the police regarding a missing person. He believed that this was a violation of the hotel's policy. In spite of the fact that this is a widely accepted rationale, it is not necessarily legally required in the majority of situations. It is possible for a hotel to collaborate with other establishments in the event of an emergency situation in order to provide assistance in the search for a person who may be in danger. But this management was inflexible in their approach. No support was offered by him in any way. It was explained to Teresa by him that in order for her to watch the movie, she would first have to go and file a complaint for a missing person. Teresa was taken aback by the news. She was feeling more and more afraid with each passing minute, and she was becoming increasingly agitated. At the same time that time was running out, those individuals who were in a position to provide assistance to her continued to maintain their obstinate unwillingness to do so. Teresa, who was under the notion that she had no other choice, left the lobby of the hotel and stood outside in the chilly early morning hours. She was under the impression that she had no other options. After removing her own phone from her pocket, she dialed the number for the police department. In addition, she offered an additional explanation on the entire incident. In spite of the fact that the hotel had surveillance footage that could reveal the location of her child's whereabouts, they refused to show it to her without first receiving a complaint from the authorities. A search for her daughter was conducted at the motel. She repeatedly pleaded with the dispatcher to send an officer to this location in order to persuade them to show us the movie. Despite the fact that the officers were eager to listen to her, it seemed as though they did not share her sense of urgency over the matter. She requested, "Can you please send an officer down here?" When viewed from their perspective, it seemed as though this was a situation that occurred rather regularly. A young person who was 19 years old was present at the party that was being held. Overindulging in alcohol was her habit. She left on her own accord. Every single time it happens to be the case. Teresa was advised that her daughter was most likely with other friends and that it was possible that she had returned to a separate room in the hotel in order to get some rest. Teresa was also informed that it was possible that her daughter took a nap. They advised her to exercise patience and wait for a couple of hours before making any decisions. Be sure to check and see if Kanika is present. It is possible that she will call them once again in the event that she has not yet arrived by that time. Teresa was now feeling a double dosage of frustration as a result of the situation. In the beginning, there was the hotel, and now there are the police. Nobody took her seriously. She was not being taken seriously. At first glance, it seemed as though no one could possibly comprehend the terror that she was going through. During the time that the sun was just about to rise, her daughter had been absent for a substantial amount of time. She came to the conclusion that she would go out and look for Kanika on her own in the case that no one else was ready to help her search for her. In no way was she going to do nothing but wait around. There was no way that she would do that. At the same time as she was making her way back into the hotel, her determination got greater. Following her ascent into an elevator, she made her way to the 9th floor, which was the location of the party that had been hosted earlier. Initially, she started pounding on doors at one end of the hallway, and then she worked her way to the opposite end of the hallway. From door to door, she knocked on each and every one of them. She went door to door. In the event that she received a response, she would question as to whether or not the individual had seen her daughter Kendall. She would query as to whether or not she was there in their chamber by describing her through the use of her description. There was a significant amount of time that she spent walking around the floors of that hotel. As she made her way from the 9th level to the 8th floor, and then from the 8th floor to the 7th floor, she not only questioned every person she saw, but also knocked on every door she encountered. She was a single mother who was on a mission. She was frantic and frightened about the situation. Despite this, she was not making any headway at all. It was impossible to find Kanika anywhere. This continued to take place all throughout the morning and into the afternoon, even after it had already begun. After Kanika had been seen for the remaining time, the administration of the hotel eventually found out where Teresa was located at roughly 1:15 inches the afternoon. This was nearly 10 hours after Kanika had been seen for the last time. They came to the realization that she was actively searching for her daughter by going from one residence to another in an effort to find her. In addition, rather than offering to help her, they went ahead and reported her to the authorities. They not only filed a report of trespassing against her, but they also issued an order that she be removed from the residential property. In light of this, law enforcement officers arrived at the Crown Plaza for the second time on that particular day. Nevertheless, they were present this time in order to deal with Teresa during this particular instance. As soon as she encountered the law enforcement officers, she was presented with a fresh opportunity. It was with great urgency that she approached them and pleaded with them to reconsider their decision. My daughter has not been seen or heard from since 10 hours ago. I have not been able to locate her. I myself am in possession of it. We are currently in possession of her keys. My attempts to get in touch with her have been unsuccessful. It would be really appreciated if you could request that the hotel give you a copy of the surveillance film. After being approached by a mother who was obviously not going to give up, the police officers complied with the request this time around. Teresa accompanied the officers as they made their way to the front desk, where they gave the manager the information that they needed access to the CCTV film. After receiving their request, the staff at the hotel showed them the footage that they had requested. On the other hand, the only cameras that were shown to them were those that were situated in close proximity to the principal entrances of the hotel. The film was evaluated by both the law enforcement officers and the security personnel working at the hotel. It was during the late hours of the previous night that they were able to see Kanika making her way into the hotel with her friends. In spite of this, they never once saw her leave the area when they were going over the hours of tape. According to the information that we have, it does not appear that Kanika has left through any of the principal entrances. It seemed as though this was abundantly plenty for both the law enforcement and the motel establishment. After that, they switched their focus to Teresa and were on the verge of saying, well, there you have it. She is still present in a particular area of the hotel. They were under the impression that their task was complete. After seeing the movie that was shown to them, they were able to formulate a straightforward response to the question. There is no attempt made to seek information regarding the existence of additional cameras. Could you please confirm whether or not there is surveillance equipment installed in the basement, the service areas, and the corridors? The investigation had been completed at this point in time due to its conclusion. Following that, they conveyed to Teresa the news that they were no longer able to contribute to her assistance. Furthermore, due to the fact that the hotel had filed a complaint, she was no longer allowed to remain on the grounds with the goal of conducting a search. She was left with no other option but to leave, and the result was that her heart was broken in the process. Her hunt for answers was fruitless, and at this time she was unable to even look for her child on her own. She was at a loss for explanations. Teresa and her family were unable to see through the haze that was the remaining hours of the day, and they were filled with the most terrible suffering. It was impossible for them to assist. It was quite difficult for them to find Kanika within that hotel, despite the fact that she was most certainly located somewhere within the establishment. The initial idea that she had simply drifted out with friends or gone to another room grew less and less plausible with each passing hour. This was because she had been out for a longer period of time. Due to the fact that she had been absent for a considerable amount of time, this was the result. Both her phone and her keys were out of her possession. Her lack of communication with anyone was a problem. Despite the fact that her mother had spent a number of hours doing a comprehensive search of the public floors of the hotel, she had not been successful in locating her daughter. The passage of time itself was the one little detail that destroyed the idea, and it was the one thing that utterly demolished the core drunk teenager will turn up theory. Extremely long periods of time had already elapsed. Something was wrong with the circumstance. A nagging feeling that had started in the middle of the night had now turned into a full-blown certainty for her family that Kanika was in extremely precarious circumstances. This realization came about as a result of all that had happened. Late that night, after what seemed like an eternity, someone or something shifted. 10 o'clock is the hour of the night. The Rosemont Police Department made the decision to go to the hotel and review the security footage once more on Saturday, 17 hours after Kanika had vanished without a trace. When they examined the material this time, they did it with a greater degree of caution. A number of factors may have contributed to this decision, including the realization that this was not a typical incident of a missing individual or the pressure that was exerted by the family. In this particular instance, they did not only look at the cameras that were covering the exits, they also looked at other cameras. They started looking through film from a number of different areas within the hotel where Kanika was staying in an effort to piece together a timeline of the activities that Kanika was known to have participated in before moving on. That was the period when they were successful in locating her. Through the use of a webcam feed that was recorded in the early hours of the morning, they were able to observe Kanika. The timestamp on the video indicated that it was 3:20 the morning immediately after her friends had left her in the lobby. This occurred just a short while after they had abandoned her. While Kanika was wandering about the motel, it was clear from the footage that she was completely by herself. There is little doubt that she was experiencing a severe case of disorientation. After exiting the main lobby area, she went in the direction of a staircase that led down rather than moving towards the exit or back to the guest elevators. She ultimately chose to take the stairway. The stairway was followed by her until she reached the bottom of the stairs. After making her way down the steps, she found herself in a part of the hotel that was not designed for use by guests. She might be found in a service corridor that was situated on the basement level of the main building. It was observed that she was walking along a lengthy corridor that was completely devoid of any individuals at any point over the course of the video. It was impossible for her to stand for an extended period of time. While she was lurching forward, she was making an effort to stabilize herself by crashing against the wall whenever she moved forward when she was moving forward. It appeared as though she was confused and disoriented. Immediately after that, the camera caught her as she rounded a corner and entered a large kitchen that was constructed out of stainless steel. This kitchen was not used at all throughout the time that it was being restored. To put it another way, it was essentially abandoned to the point that it was practically abandoned. In the course of her journey around the empty kitchen, she came across ovens and counters that were not being utilized by anyone. It was at that very moment that she stepped away from the camera's line of sight, which was situated at the opposite end of the kitchen. When the shot was taken, she was no longer showing up. The authorities maintained their monitoring efforts, employing a number of different camera angles in their investigations. In contrast, she was never captured on any other camera again after that point in time. Following the time when she left the kitchen, there was no more sighting of her. Now that they had a specific location from which to carry out their duties, the authorities were completely aware of the tasks that they needed to complete. Following their departure from the security office, they dashed straight down to the basement of the hotel, where they remained until they were no longer in danger. The exact halls that Kanika had gone through a few hours earlier were traversed by them as they made their way through the same vacant corridors. After entering the kitchen, there was a complete lack of any noise whatsoever. At this point, they began their search. The clock was ticking down to 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was still far beyond midnight. It was precisely the morning of Sunday. It had been close to 24 hours since Kanika's friends had last seen her. This meant that some of them had not seen her in quite some time. In addition, the unfortunate finale of the search for Kanika Jenkins took place in the kitchen where she was being detained. The police officers saw a massive freezer that was accessible to the general population. It was possible for them to open the enormous passageway. In addition to that, they found Kanika hidden away. Her existence had come to an end. As a result of the study, the events that took place during the perplexing minutes that she was dying were pieced together. After she had parted ways with her friends, Kanika, who was in a state of acute intoxication, had drifted off into the distance. After making her way down, she entered the kitchen of the hotel's basement, which was absolutely devoid of any presence. A walk-in freezer of considerable size and of commercial quality had been left on and unlocked for reasons that we may never be able to fully comprehend. The freezer had been left on. There was a door that was open. Kanika, who was probably looking for a spot to relax or rest because she was lost, entered the entryway. She must have been looking for a location to do so. The heavy door, which was constructed to close tightly and was insulated, swung shut behind her once she had left the room. Due to the fact that the door had already been shut, it would have been incredibly challenging, if not impossible, for someone in her position to open the door from the inside. Despite the fact that the majority of current refrigerators come equipped with an integrated safety release mechanism, it is extremely plausible that Kanika was unable to locate it or even realize what was happening place. Her death was brought on by hypothermia, which was brought on by the fact that she was confined inside the icy environment. Kanika's death was determined to have been the consequence of an accident, according to the official verdict of the medical examiner. Alcohol and topiramate, a medication that is taken for epilepsy and migraines, were discovered as significant contributory factors when it was concluded that hypothermia was the cause of death. Hypothermia was also recognized as the cause of death. From the perspective of her family and a sizable portion of the broader public, however, the narrative was not as straightforward as it may have appeared. The announcement of her passing and the unusual circumstances that accompanied it aroused an anger of unparalleled proportions. Irreverent circumstances surrounded her passing. The information that was brought to light regarding the hotel, as well as the initial response that the police department provided to the matter, shocked and outraged the general population significantly. Internet sleuths and concerned individuals began investigating every piece of evidence that was available, and when the conspiracy theories involving the alleged foul play were initially published, they began to spread like wildfire throughout the internet. In the eyes of the general public, the concept that a young woman could accidentally find herself confined inside a freezer in a major hotel was just incomprehensible. Nevertheless, in spite of all the rumors and speculation, the investigators could not discover any evidence to suggest that anyone else was contributing to her passing after they conducted their investigation. The most significant and puzzling question that has not yet been answered, on the other hand, has nothing to do with a conspiracy. Time is the major concern in this scenario. On the day when Teresa, Kanika's mother, arrived at that motel, it had been just 2 hours since Kanika had vanished without a trace. Earlier, she had urged with the employees to have a look at the surveillance cameras. When she was in a difficult situation, she had pleaded with them to help her. They were not in agreement. The police, upon receiving her call, did not take her worries into consideration and instead asked her to wait for additional instructions. On the other hand, what if they had looked at it? What would have happened if, at 5 or 6 in the morning, when Teresa was the first person to raise the alarm, the workers at the hotel had simply gone through all of the footage? As a result of their presence, they would have seen Kanika making her way into the basement by accident. They might have found her in the kitchen, which was a possibility considering the circumstances. A maximum of a couple of hours would have been the maximum amount of time that she would have spent in the freezer prior to that crucial period. Not only is it conceivable that she would have been alive all along, but it is also a chance that she would have been alive if she had in fact been alive. Tragically, not only is it a tragedy that Kanika Jenkins lost away, but it is also a tragedy that she could have been prevented from passing away to such a big degree. There was a window of opportunity when a rescue could have been performed. Nevertheless, that window of opportunity was allowed to close. The string of failures, which included the hotel's refusal to comply and the police's initial lack of urgency, were the reasons why there was a window of chance. Almost immediately after the occurrence, Teresa Martin filed a lawsuit against the Crowne Plaza Hotel, the security company that was employed by the hotel, and the restaurant that was leasing the cooking space. Many millions of dollars were the subject of the complaint that was filed. It was alleged in the complaint that they were careless in the sense that they did not adequately lock a potentially hazardous place, which was the walk-in freezer. In addition, it was asserted that the fact that they did not respond promptly to her requests for assistance was a direct factor in the passing of her daughter. Following a protracted legal struggle, the matter was ultimately settled out of court for a sum that was estimated to be greater than $6 million. Despite this, there is no amount of money that will ever bring Kanika back or erase the dreadful what-ifs that will continue to afflict her family. Neither one of these items is feasible at this time. They are left with the disheartening reality that the system that was intended to protect individuals failed their daughter at every single point of the process. They discovered that they were in this predicament without knowledge. In the final eerie film, Kanika can be seen wandering through the hotel's chilly and deserted hallways by herself. This footage serves as a heartbreaking final tribute to a life that was cut too short. In addition to this, it serves as a sobering reminder of how a series of decisions made by bureaucrats that appear to be of little significance can result in the most disastrous of outcomes. I want to express my gratitude for your presence here today. If you watched the program that was broadcast today, I would appreciate it if you could share your ideas with me in the comments area. Also, bear in mind that we have a whole playlist of episodes of true crime waiting for you to watch in one sitting right now. You may watch all of these episodes in one sitting. Till the next time we meet again, what's going on? In 1993, David Lewis was a man who seemed to have it all. He was a successful and well-respected lawyer living in Amarillo, Texas. He had a loving wife, Karen, and a beautiful 9-year-old daughter. By all accounts, he was a devoted family man, the kind of guy who coached his daughter's sports teams and spent his free time helping out with local charities. His life was stable, predictable, and happy. On January 28th of that year, a Thursday, Karen and their daughter were getting ready for a fun weekend trip. They were heading to Dallas, a few hours away, for a mother-daughter shopping spree. It was something they were both really looking forward to. Normally, David would have tagged along, making a family trip out of it. But this particular weekend was a big one for sports fans. The Super Bowl was on that Sunday, the 31st, and David didn't want to miss it. He was a huge fan and wanted to enjoy the game from the comfort of his own home. So he said his goodbyes, and Karen and their daughter drove off to Dallas, leaving David to have the house to himself for a couple of days. They had their trip, and then on Sunday, after the big game had finished, they made the drive back home to Amarillo. As they pulled into the driveway, they were expecting to walk in and find David either cleaning up some game day snacks or maybe watching the post-game analysis. When they stepped inside, the house was quiet. The first thing Karen noticed was that the TV was still on, tuned to the channel that had just aired the Super Bowl. That wasn't too strange. But David was nowhere to be found. Karen called out his name, but there was no answer. She walked through the familiar rooms of their home, a little confused but not yet worried. She figured maybe he had gotten a last-minute invitation to watch the second half at a friend's house and just hadn't called. She noticed the VCR was still recording. This was classic David. He was known for recording all the major sporting events so he could watch them again later. The fact that the VCR was still running meant he hadn't been the one to turn it off. It was just another small, slightly odd detail. Karen continued her search, calling his name. She went into the kitchen, and that's when things started to feel a little more unsettling. She opened the refrigerator door, maybe looking for a note, or just seeing what was inside. And there, on a shelf, was a plate with 2 freshly made turkey sandwiches. This was a sandwich David made all the time, his go-to snack. But why would he make 2 sandwiches and then just leave them in the fridge, uneaten? It didn't make sense. She closed the fridge door and turned around. On the kitchen counter, she saw something that made her pause. It was David's wedding band and his watch, just sitting there. Now, this was truly strange. A man might forget his wallet, but leaving behind his wedding ring and his watch was different. It felt personal. Still, Karen tried to rationalize it. There were no signs of a break-in. Nothing was stolen or out of place. There was absolutely no evidence of a struggle. The house was exactly as it should be, just without David in it. Her best guess was that he had simply stepped out in a hurry and would be back soon. So, Karen waited up for a while, but as the hours ticked by, she eventually went to bed, telling herself he would surely be there in the morning. But when she woke up the next day, the other side of the bed was still empty. David had not come home. Now, real worry began to set in. The strange little details from the night before suddenly felt much more sinister. She knew something was wrong. She called the police and reported her husband missing. The Amarillo police began their investigation immediately. It didn't take them long to find a major clue. Within 24 hours, they located David's car. It was parked and abandoned in a downtown lot not far from the courthouse where he often worked. When they searched the vehicle, they found his keys, both for the car and the house, tucked away under one of the floor mats. Inside the car, everything seemed to be in order. His checkbook was there. His credit cards were in the glove compartment. His driver's license was right where it should be. Nothing of value had been taken. Investigators then looked into his recent financial activity, and that's when the story took another strange turn. They saw he had recently made a deposit of $5,000 into the family bank account. That seemed more like someone planning for their family's future than someone in trouble. But then they found something else. He had also recently purchased 2 one-way plane tickets. One was from Los Angeles to Dallas, and the other was from Dallas back to Amarillo. Police couldn't determine if he had actually used these tickets, but it added to a growing theory that maybe David had chosen to disappear. When the police presented all of this to Karen, the abandoned car, the untouched valuables, the bank activity, she told them something that changed the entire direction of the investigation. She said that just before he disappeared, David had told her that he believed his life might be in danger. He was scheduled to give a deposition in Dallas later that month. It was for a complicated conflict of interest case involving his old law firm and one of their very wealthy, very powerful clients. According to Karen, David was being heavily pressured by his former colleagues to lie to cover up some of the firm's wrongdoings. But David was an honest man. He had told his family that he was going to tell the absolute truth in his deposition, no matter whose reputation it destroyed. He knew this decision would make him a lot of enemies. He understood that telling the truth put a huge target on his back. This information was a bombshell. The police were certainly intrigued. It painted a picture of a man caught in a dangerous situation, not one who would just walk away from his family. But the problem was, it was just a story. They had no hard evidence to support the idea that someone was actively trying to silence David Lewis. It was a compelling theory, but without proof, it was just that, a theory. For the next 11 months, investigators followed every lead they could find. They interviewed his former colleagues. They looked into the wealthy client from the lawsuit, but they found nothing. No new information surfaced. There were no sightings of David. He never called home. He never used his credit cards or his social security number. He had, for all intents and purposes, vanished from the face of the earth. After nearly a year with no progress, the police officially decided to close the case. The official conclusion was that David Lewis had left of his own accord. They ruled out foul play. For David's family, this was a devastating blow. They had to try and accept the unacceptable, that David was gone, and they would likely never know what truly happened to him. The years passed, and the mystery of his disappearance remained a painful, open wound. Then, in 2004, 11 years after David vanished, something incredible happened. A state trooper in Washington state was sitting at his computer browsing the internet. He had an interest in unsolved mysteries and was looking through old cold cases. He clicked on a page and a picture of David Lewis popped up on his screen. The trooper stared at the photo. He felt an immediate jolt of recognition. The face looked exactly like an unidentified victim from a hit-and-run case he had worked on way back in 1993. His heart pounding, he pulled up the old case file. The details matched up in a chilling way. The John Doe victim had been struck by a vehicle and killed just one day after David Lewis was reported missing in Texas. The man had been found on the side of Highway 24 inches rural Washington state, a staggering 1,600 miles away from Amarillo. When he was found, this John Doe was dressed from head to toe in military-style clothing. He had no wallet, no identification, and no luggage or bags of any kind. He was just walking aimlessly down the side of a remote highway. Despite the immense distance and the strange circumstances, the trooper felt a growing certainty that this was David. But as he looked back at the picture of David Lewis, he noticed David was wearing glasses. He tried to remember if the John Doe from 1993 had been wearing glasses, and he didn't think so. It was a small detail, but it could be the one that proved him wrong. Just to be sure, he checked the evidence log, the list of personal belongings found on the body, and there it was. The John Doe did have a pair of glasses on him. And when he saw the description, it was a perfect match to the exact same kind of glasses David was wearing in his photo. It wasn't long before DNA testing was done, and the results came back as a definitive match. The John Doe from Washington was without a doubt David Lewis. After 11 long years, the mystery of where David went was finally solved. But it only opened up an even bigger, more disturbing mystery. Why? Why would David travel 1,600 miles to Washington, a state where he had no friends, no family, and no connections whatsoever? If he was the one who hit the record button on his VCR on Super Bowl night, that meant he had less than 24 hours to get from Amarillo, Texas, to that remote highway in Washington. He did it without his car, without his credit cards, and seemingly without any luggage. Where did the military clothing come from? Did he buy it? Or did someone make him wear it? What was he doing walking down that highway in the middle of nowhere? David's family has always believed that he was a victim of foul play. They believe his own words to his wife that his life was in danger because of the testimony he was about to give. They believe someone abducted him from his home, drove him across the country, and killed him, staging it to look like a random accident. But officially, the case remains closed. The police maintain that David Lewis left his home voluntarily, and his death on that lonely highway was nothing more than a tragic accident. In the year 2000, Mary Lou Morris was a 48-year-old woman living a quiet life in Houston, Texas. She worked as a loan officer at a Chase bank and was happily married to her husband, Jay. On the morning of October 12th, a Thursday, everything seemed perfectly normal. Mary Lou said goodbye to Jay and left for her job at the bank, just like she did every other weekday. That afternoon, Jay decided to give his wife a call at work just to check in. But she didn't pick up her phone. He left her a voicemail, figuring she was just busy with a customer and didn't think much of it. But as the afternoon wore on and she didn't call him back, a small seed of concern started to grow. This was very out of character for Mary Lou. She always returned his calls. By 5 p.m., when Mary Lou should have been finishing up her workday, Jay still hadn't heard from her. He called her again, but once more, the call went straight to voicemail. Now his concern was turning into real worry. He decided to call Mary Lou's supervisor at the bank. The supervisor picked up, and Jay asked if he could speak to his wife. And the supervisor's response sent a chill down his spine. He told Jay that Mary Lou hadn't come into work at all that day. They had tried to get in touch with her as well, but couldn't reach her. In that moment, Jay knew something was terribly wrong. He immediately hung up and dialed 911, reporting his wife missing. The police had barely even started their search for Mary Lou when another call came into the station. It was from a man who had been riding his ATV on a remote dirt road about 3 miles from the Morris' home. He told the dispatcher that he had just stumbled upon a smoldering, burnt-out car, and he could see what looked like a body in the driver's seat. It turned out that the fire department had actually received a call earlier that day, around 10 inches the morning, about smoke being seen in that same area. But at the time, they had assumed it was just a controlled burn on someone's property, so they didn't send a unit out to investigate. When police and emergency services arrived at the scene, they found the car was completely destroyed by the fire. The body inside was so badly burned that it was impossible to visually identify who it was. Investigators carefully sifted through the wreckage, and they were able to find a small tooth fragment. They sent it off for testing, and soon their worst fears were confirmed. Dental records proved that the victim was indeed Mary Lou Morris. It was immediately clear to investigators that this was no accident. This was a homicide. They found evidence that gasoline had been poured all over Mary Lou and all over the interior of the car before it was set ablaze. It seemed the killer had tried to stage the scene, perhaps to make it look like a suicide or a tragic car fire. But because of the intense damage from the fire, the medical examiner couldn't determine an exact cause of death. They didn't know if Mary Lou was already deceased when she was placed in the car, or if the fire itself was what killed her. As police processed the scene, they noted that a number of Mary Lou's valuables, like her purse, were still inside the car. But one very important item was missing. Her wedding ring was not on her finger. The news of Mary Lou's brutal murder shocked her family and the entire community. She was known as a kind, gentle person who didn't have a single enemy in the world. No one could understand why anyone would want to hurt her. The day after her body was found, the case took another bizarre turn. A local Houston newspaper received a phone call from an anonymous man. All he said was, Mary Lou's death was an accident. The reporter on the line tried to press him for more information, asking who he was and what he meant, but the man simply hung up. The call was untraceable. At the exact same time this tragedy was unfolding for the Morris family, a completely separate drama was playing out for another woman in Houston. Her name, coincidentally, was also Mary Morris. This was 9-year-old. Mary McGinnis Morris. She was a successful and well-liked nurse practitioner. She generally got along with everyone at the clinic where she worked, with one notable exception. A new male nurse, a man named Dwayne Young, had recently started working there, and he was making her feel extremely uncomfortable. He seemed to have a problem with her for no apparent reason. One day, Mary McGinnis returned to her desk after seeing a patient and found something deeply disturbing. All of the framed photos of her family that she kept on her desk had been turned face down. And in the very center of her desk was a small piece of paper with 3 words written on it, death to her. She knew in her gut that it had to be Dwayne. But she had no proof. That night, she went home and told her husband Mike about what had happened. She told him about Dwayne and the note, and she said, I don't feel safe at work anymore. Can you teach me how to shoot a gun? Mike agreed. He took her to a range and taught her how to handle a firearm safely. He then bought her a small pistol, which she started keeping tucked under the driver's seat of her car, just in case. On October 16th, 4 days after Mary Lou Morris's body was found, and 3 days after that strange anonymous call to the newspaper, Mary McGinnis Morris finished her shift at the clinic and stopped at a drugstore on her way home. As soon as she walked inside, she noticed a man on the other side of the store who seemed to be watching her every move. She felt a wave of fear and immediately pulled out her cell phone and called her best friend, Lori. She described the strange man to Lori and asked what she should do. Lori told her to just wait, to pretend to shop until the man left the store. But the man didn't leave. He just stayed there, lingering in an aisle, staring at her. Finally, Mary McGinnis decided she couldn't wait any longer. She told Lori, you know what, I'm just going to pay for my stuff and get out of here. I have to make a quick stop by the office, but I'll be home in just a few minutes. I'll be fine. She hung up the phone, walked to the register, bought her items, and left the store. Just 12 minutes later, a frantic 911 call came in. It was Mary McGinnis Morris. The dispatcher could hear the sheer terror in her voice as she screamed that someone was trying to kill her. The contents of that 911 call have never been made public, reportedly because on the recording, you can actually hear the moment she is attacked. Later that night, Mary McGinnis was found in her car. She was deceased. She had a single gunshot wound to the head. It was clear from her terrified 911 call that this was a homicide. But just like with the first Mary Morris, her killer had attempted to stage the scene to look like a suicide. The murder weapon, which was her own pistol that she kept under her seat, had been carefully placed on the seat next to her hand. None of her valuables had been stolen from the car. But, just like Mary Lou Morris, her wedding ring was missing from her finger. After the murder of the second Mary Morris, police and the public began to speculate that these two cases had to be connected. It was just too much of a coincidence. Two women, sharing the same name, living in the same city, murdered within days of each other. In both cases, the crime scenes were staged to look self-inflicted. And in both cases, the victim's wedding ring was taken. A chilling theory began to form. This was a professional hit gone horribly wrong. The people who subscribed to this theory believed that Mary McGinnis Morris was the intended target all along, and that the murder of Mary Lou Morris was a tragic mistake. They reasoned that a hitman was hired, given the name Mary Morris and a general location, and he simply killed the wrong woman first. Then, upon realizing his mistake, he was the one who anonymously called the newspaper to say her death was an accident. And a few days later, the hit was successfully carried out on the correct target, Mary McGinnis Morris. The detail about the missing wedding rings supported this theory, as it's reportedly a common practice for hitmen to take a personal item like that to prove to their client that the job is done. Police took this theory very seriously and began looking into who might want Mary McGinnis Morris dead. Their attention quickly turned to her husband, Mike. They discovered that he had recently accused her of having an affair and was said to be extremely angry about it. He also behaved suspiciously after her murder, refusing to take a polygraph test and not allowing the police to interview his daughter. And then there was the motive. Mary McGinnis had a $700,000 life insurance policy, and Mike was the sole beneficiary. It seemed like a classic case of a husband hiring a hitman to kill his wife. But when investigators dug deeper, they couldn't find a single piece of evidence that tied Mike to either his wife's murder or the murder of Mary Lou Morris. As for her creepy coworker, Dwayne Young, who wrote the death to her note, police determined that while he clearly disliked her, he was not involved in her death. And so, both of these incredibly strange and tragic cases went cold. To this day, no one has ever been arrested or charged in either murder. In 1996, Blair Adams was a 31-year-old man living in Surrey, a suburb of Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada. In his past, he had some struggles with alcoholism and substance abuse, but for the last 2 years, he had completely turned his life around. He was clean, sober, and had landed a great job as a foreman for a local construction company. He was known as a friendly, cheerful guy who was easy to get along with and had no known enemies. But in the summer of that year, something changed in Blair. He started exhibiting strange and uncharacteristic mood swings. His mother would later describe them as being frequent and wild. In just a matter of weeks, the calm, relaxed, and friendly man she knew transformed into someone who was constantly panicked and on edge. He was always looking over his shoulder as if he expected someone to be following him. The stress was so intense that he couldn't sleep at night. He began telling his friends and coworkers that he was convinced someone was trying to kill him. They were concerned, telling him that he wasn't okay and that he really needed to see a doctor. When his mother confronted him about his increasingly erratic and paranoid behavior, he was secretive. He told her, "Mom, I really shouldn't tell you about it." She pressed him, asking, "What's it?" But he just shook his head and said, "I can't say anything else." And that was all she could ever get out of him. Blair's strange behavior reached a crisis point on Friday, July 5th. He went to his bank and withdrew his entire life savings in cash, a total of $6,000. He then went to his safety deposit box and emptied it as well. It contained thousands of dollars worth of gold, platinum, and expensive jewelry. It was the kind of thing someone does when they're planning to run. 2 days later, on Sunday, he got in his car and drove 30 minutes to the U.S. Canada border. He attempted to cross into the United States, but he was turned away. To the border guards, he was a collection of red flags. A single man traveling alone, carrying a large amount of cash and valuables, and acting extremely nervous. He fit the profile of a drug trafficker, and they denied him entry. Frustrated, Blair drove back home. The next day, Monday, he showed up at his construction site and walked straight into his boss's office. He abruptly announced that he was quitting, effective immediately. He didn't even bother to pick up his final paycheck. He just turned around and walked away. From the construction site, he went directly to the airport. There, he walked up to a ticket counter and purchased a round-trip ticket to Frankfurt, Germany for $1,600. No one knows for sure why he wanted to go to Germany, but he had worked there briefly the year before. His flight was scheduled to depart the following day, on Tuesday. But as soon as he bought the ticket, Blair seemed to change his mind again. He suddenly decided he needed to try and get into the United States one more time. He rushed from the airport to a female friend's house. When she opened the door, she was shocked by his appearance. He looked completely disheveled and terrified. He told her, "Someone's trying to kill me. I need your help. Can you drive me across the border? They just rejected me a couple of days ago. You have kids. It'll look more convincing if I'm with a family." His friend was seriously spooked by his frantic behavior and told him she couldn't help. So Blair went home and hid out for the rest of the day. The next morning, Tuesday, he went back to the airport. But instead of getting on his flight to Frankfurt, he went to the ticket counter and asked for a refund. He told the agent that the person he was supposed to meet in Germany had gotten sick, so he couldn't go. The only person this could have been was a woman he had a brief fling with while working there the year before. But later, when investigators spoke to this German woman, she told them she hadn't been in touch with Blair at all and was definitely not expecting him to visit. After getting his refund, Blair left the airport and went to a car rental agency where he rented a Nissan Altima. He immediately drove back to the U.S. Canada border, and this time, for whatever reason, he was allowed to cross. He drove south to Seattle, Washington, went straight to the airport there, and simply abandoned his rental car in the middle of a parking lot. He then went inside and bought a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C. The ticket cost him $770. He could have bought a round-trip ticket for about half that price, but he specifically chose the more expensive one-way option. He boarded the plane that night, and by Wednesday morning, he was on the other side of the country in Washington, D.C. As soon as he got off the plane, he rented another car, this time a Toyota Camry, and started driving again. He drove 500 miles southwest to Knoxville, Tennessee. Blair wasn't seen in Knoxville until around 5:30 that evening when he pulled into a gas station. He told the attendant that he was having trouble with his car. The attendant came out to take a look, and he immediately figured out the problem. Blair was trying to start his Toyota Camry with the key to the Nissan Altima he had abandoned in Seattle. The attendant pointed this out, but Blair, clearly confused, held up the key and insisted, "No, this is the one I was using." The attendant pointed to the Nissan logo on the key. Together, they searched the car inside and out, looking for the missing Toyota key, but it was nowhere to be found. Blair tried calling the rental company, but their office was already closed for the day. The gas station attendant told him there was nothing more he could do and that they would have to tow the car. But he offered to give Blair a ride to a nearby hotel. Blair accepted. Just after 6 p.m. that night, Blair walked through the front doors of a Fairfield Inn. Hotel security footage captured what happened next. He walked in, stood in the lobby for a moment, then turned around and walked right back out. A few minutes later, he walked in again, and then walked out again. He did this over and over 5 separate times over the course of an hour. Finally, he approached the front desk and asked for a room. The front desk clerk later told police that Blair seemed completely paranoid. He was constantly looking over his shoulder and was visibly on edge the entire time. She gave him his room key, he paid in cash, and then instead of going up to his room, he turned around, walked out the front door one last time, and never came back. The next morning, 2 construction workers arrived at their job site, which was located in a vacant lot directly across the street from the Fairfield Inn. As they started their day, they discovered a body. It was Blair Adams. He was lying on the ground, and strangely, he was missing his shoes, his socks, and his pants. He had several scratches on his hands and face, but none of the injuries were life-threatening. Scattered on the ground all around his body was $4,000 in a mix of American, Canadian, and German currency. His fanny pack, full of all the expensive gold and jewelry from his safety deposit box, was also lying nearby. A black duffel bag containing maps and travel receipts was on the ground. And also, lying in the dirt, was the missing key to the Toyota Camry. An autopsy was performed, and the medical examiner determined that Blair had died from a single massive violent blow to his stomach that had ruptured his organs. They had no idea what could have caused such an injury. A toxicology report came back clean. There were no drugs or alcohol in his system. The only piece of forensic evidence found at the crime scene was a single long strand of hair that Blair was found clutching tightly in his fist. There were no witnesses to the attack, but a security guard at a nearby business reported hearing a woman's scream coming from the direction of the lot at around 3:30 that morning. The only real lead police had was a composite sketch of a man who several people had seen Blair talking to outside of a Cracker Barrel restaurant shortly after he had left the hotel for the final time. But police were never able to identify this man. Investigators were completely baffled. Was Blair telling the truth all along? Had someone been hunting him for weeks, finally catching up to him in a vacant lot in Tennessee? If so, why didn't they take the thousands of dollars in cash and valuables that were lying right next to his body? Or was Blair suffering from a severe paranoid delusion, and his death was the result of a random, tragic encounter with a violent stranger? To this day, we still have no idea. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. This is a story that has fascinated people for decades. It's one of those cases that, no matter how you look at it, it just doesn't seem to make sense. In 1979, the New York Times called it one of the Western world's most convincing cases of reincarnation. Now, a lot of stories about past lives are hard to verify. There's usually no real proof you can point to today. But this one is different. This is the story of a woman named Dorothy Eady, who later became known as Om Seti. And her life story and the things she claimed to remember from a past life led to real, verifiable, modern-day discoveries in Egypt. Things that professional Egyptologists and historians just couldn't explain. For decades, they tried to prove she was a fraud, that she was lying. And they never could. She knew things she just shouldn't have known. Things that make you stop and wonder, what if she was telling the truth? Our story begins in London in 1904. Dorothy Eady was born into a lower middle-class family. She was an only child, and her parents absolutely adored her. Life was normal, quiet, and happy for the first 3 years. And then, one day, everything changed. Little 3-year-old Dorothy was playing in her home when she took a terrible fall down a flight of stairs. She was knocked completely unconscious. Her parents were frantic. They called for the family doctor, who rushed over to the house. He examined Dorothy, and after a few moments, he had to deliver the worst news imaginable. He turned to her parents and told them their daughter was dead. The next hour was just a blur of grief for her parents. The doctor was there, trying to console them, talking about what needed to happen next. They were in a state of total shock. But then, about an hour after the doctor had pronounced her dead, they heard something, a sound coming from Dorothy's bedroom. They went to check, and they could not believe their eyes. There was Dorothy, sitting up on her bed, playing as if nothing had happened. They rushed in, the doctor right behind them, and they were all just speechless. Dorothy seemed perfectly fine. Her parents, in their confusion and relief, turned on the doctor. They were furious, yelling at him for pronouncing her dead when she was clearly alive. But the doctor was adamant. He swore she had been gone. He had checked for a pulse, for breath. There was nothing. He had no medical explanation for what had just happened. In the days and weeks after the accident, Dorothy's parents noticed some changes. The biggest one was her voice. She started speaking with a strange accent, one they couldn't place at all. They took her to doctors and specialists who suggested she might be suffering from something called foreign accent syndrome. It's a real medical condition that can happen after a significant head injury, and it basically alters a person's speech patterns. To someone who doesn't know, it can sound like they suddenly have a foreign accent. But that wasn't the only strange thing. Dorothy also started talking about a recurring dream. She told her parents that every night she would dream of a huge building with massive pillars. And right next to this building was the most beautiful garden she had ever seen. She would describe the flowers, the trees, the feeling of peace she had when she was there. It was like an oasis. She loved this garden more than anything. But in the dream, she didn't know where it was. And being just 3 or 4 years old, she had a hard time articulating exactly what she was seeing. All she knew was that she loved this place in her dreams, and she talked about it constantly. It got to the point where her mother would often find her crying in her bed, either before going to sleep or right after waking up. When her mother asked what was wrong, Dorothy would say she wanted to go home. Her mother would try to reassure her, saying, "But honey, you are home." And Dorothy would shake her head and insist, "No, I'm not. My home is there, in the garden." She was completely convinced that the place in her dreams was her real home, and nothing her parents said could change her mind. A little while later, when Dorothy was still very young, her parents decided to take her on a trip to the British Museum. The museum had a large exhibit on ancient Egypt. As they walked in, Dorothy spotted the Egyptian section from across the room. Her eyes went wide. She saw the towering statues of pharaohs, the pictures of the pyramids and the Sphinx, and then she just took off. She sprinted away from her parents, running straight into the exhibit. She ran up to the statues, these ancient stone figures, and started kissing their feet. She was sobbing, completely overcome with emotion, and yelling out loud, "I'm home! I'm home! I'm with my people!" This tiny little girl was having this huge emotional revelation right there in the middle of the museum. Her parents were mortified. People were staring, wondering what on earth was wrong with their child. They eventually managed to calm her down and get her to leave, but something had clicked into place for Dorothy. From that day forward, she knew. The beautiful garden from her dreams, the place she longed for, was in Egypt. Her newfound obsession with ancient Egypt started to cause problems. Her family was very devoutly Catholic, and they sent her to Sunday school. But Dorothy would constantly compare the teachings of Catholicism with what she knew about ancient Egyptian religions. This did not go over well. Eventually, the church told her she couldn't come to Sunday school anymore. Then, she was expelled from her Catholic school. The reason was that she refused to sing certain hymns, specifically ones that she felt were disrespectful to the ancient Egyptians. She was even barred from attending Sunday Mass. By the age of 6, Dorothy, who was already a good reader and writer in English, became fascinated with Egyptian hieroglyphics. The moment she saw them, she said they felt familiar, but it was like a language she had forgotten how to read. When she was 7 years old, she was looking through a book one day when she saw a picture. It was a photograph of the Temple of Seti I, which is in a place called Abydos, Egypt. The picture showed the Grand Temple, and next to it were the crumbling remains of what looked like it might have once been a garden. As soon as Dorothy saw it, she pointed and said, "That's it. That's my home." She was absolutely certain. That temple in Abydos was where she was from. She looked closer at the picture, at the broken, tattered remains next to the temple walls. "That's the garden," she said. "But where are all the trees? Why does it look like this?" She couldn't understand that thousands of years had passed. In her mind, she was seeing her home, but it was ruined. The textbook also had a picture of the pharaoh the temple was named after, Seti I. When she saw the image of his very well-preserved mummy, she was once again overcome with emotion. She said she had known him. She remembered him personally. This incredible knowledge didn't go unnoticed. At age 10, she caught the attention of a world-renowned Egyptologist named A. Wallace Budge. He was so impressed by her passion and her strange familiarity with the subject that he offered to personally teach her how to read and write hieroglyphics. She picked it up almost instantly, as if she were just remembering something she already knew. As she got older, the dreams continued. But starting around age 14, a new one began. It was a nightmare. In this nightmare, she was trapped in a dark underground room. A high priest was there, interrogating her, demanding she answer his questions. When she refused, he had her beaten. This dream would haunt her for years. Fast forward to when Dorothy, now called Edie, was 27. She met an Egyptian man, and they fell in love. But it's also very likely she saw the marriage as a way to finally get to Egypt. She wanted to secure Egyptian residency. As soon as they were married, they moved. The moment their boat landed in Egypt, Edie was overwhelmed. She got down on her hands and knees, kissed the ground, and cried, saying over and over again, "I'm home. I'm finally home." She and her husband soon had a son, and in a move that surprised no one who knew her, they named him Seti. Once she was living in Egypt, Edie's experiences became even more intense. She claimed she started receiving nightly visits from a spiritual entity she called Hora. She believed Hora was the spirit of the pharaoh, Seti I. For about a year, these visits would happen almost every night. Her husband would wake up in the middle of the night to find her in a trance-like state. She would be sitting up, her eyes glazed over, frantically writing in a notebook, but she wasn't writing in English. She was writing page after page of perfect, intricate hieroglyphics. Her husband said he couldn't snap her out of it. It was like she was possessed, just writing and writing. Edie later explained that Hora was dictating her life story to her, the story of who she used to be. Over the course of that year, she filled over 70 pages with this story, all written in hieroglyphics. And the story went like this. Before she was Dorothy Edie, she was an Egyptian woman named Bentrashite, which means harp of joy. She had lived 3,000 years earlier during the reign of Pharaoh Seti I. Her father was a soldier, and her mother was a simple vegetable seller. Her mother died when Bentrashite was only 3 years old. Her father, unable to care for her on his own, placed her in the temple at Qom el-Sultan, which was near Abydos. She was raised in the temple and eventually became a priestess. When she turned 12, she was given a choice. She could either leave the temple and go out into the world on her own, or she could stay and become a consecrated virgin, dedicating her life to the gods. Bentrashit chose to stay and took the vows. But a few years later, she met Pharaoh Seti I. They fell in love and began a secret relationship. Soon after, she discovered she was pregnant. For a consecrated virgin priestess, this was a catastrophic transgression. The high priest of the temple found out and interrogated her fiercely, demanding to know the name of the father. This interrogation, she realized, was the scene from her recurring nightmare. He had her beaten when she refused to name Seti. Bentrashit knew that if the truth came out, it would cause a massive public scandal for the pharaoh, the man she loved. Unwilling to let that happen, she took her own life. This entire experience, the nightly trances, the obsessive writing of hieroglyphics, the bizarre story of a past life, was all too much for Edie's husband. He grew more and more disturbed by her behavior. In 1936, he filed for divorce. After the divorce, Dorothy and her young son Seti moved to a town near the Giza pyramids. It was around this time that she stopped going by Dorothy Edie. She adopted a new name, Seti, which in Arabic means Mother of Seti. She was fully embracing her new identity, one that was deeply connected to ancient Egypt. She soon took a job with Egypt's Department of Antiquities, beginning a long and surprisingly successful career in Egyptology. For nearly 20 years, Seti dedicated her life to her work. She researched and wrote and drew, becoming an expert. Her primary focus, of course, was the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. She learned everything there was to know about its history, its architecture, and the people who lived and worked there 3,000 years ago. It was, after all, the place she believed had been her home. But incredibly, for all those years, she never actually went there. It wasn't until 1952, when she was almost 50 years old, that she finally got the chance to set foot in Abydos. A job transfer came up, and she jumped at the opportunity. In fact, she was so desperate to go that she even took a significant pay cut to get the position. The moment she walked into the temple grounds, she felt a profound sense of familiarity. The first thing she said was, "It's as if I've lived here before." She quickly set up an office for herself in one of the temple's rooms and spent nearly all of her time there, working and just being in the space. She even developed a strange friendship with a wild cobra that lived on the grounds. She would feed it every day, and the snake would just hang out with her. Nobody could make sense of it. Rumors flew around about this eccentric Englishwoman, but her contributions to Egyptology were so significant and so valuable that she earned the deep respect of her colleagues, even if they thought her personal beliefs were strange. But of all her accomplishments, Seti is most famous for what happened shortly after she arrived at the temple. She had been dreaming of that beautiful garden her entire life. She walked around the crumbling exterior of the temple, and then she pointed to a specific spot. She told the chief inspector of antiquities that if they dug right there, they would find the temple garden. The archaeologists were skeptical. There were no records, no texts, nothing to suggest a garden had ever been in that location. But Seti was so certain. She didn't just point to the spot, she described the entire layout. She told them where the pathways would be, what kinds of trees they would find, and where those trees were planted. To appease her, and probably to prove her wrong, they decided to dig. And they were stunned. They dug down, and there it was. A garden. Exactly where she said it would be. And as they excavated, they found that the layout, the root systems of the ancient trees, everything matched her descriptions perfectly. This was information she could not have possibly known. It wasn't written down anywhere. But that was just the beginning. She then told them to excavate on the north side of the temple. She said there was a secret, undiscovered tunnel that ran underneath the temple from that side. Again, the archaeologists were doubtful. But again, they dug. And sure enough, there was the tunnel. It was a major discovery, and only she knew about it. Her uncanny knowledge didn't stop at the temple. She also pointed researchers to a specific unexplored area in the Valley of the Kings, a famous burial ground for pharaohs. She told them they would find a long-forgotten tomb there. They searched where she indicated, and they found a tomb that had never been discovered before. Time and time again, she provided information that led to incredible finds. The other Egyptologists, the scientists and academics, they didn't want to believe her story about reincarnation. They wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of a strange woman, maybe an elaborate and clever hoax. But they were faced with a problem they couldn't solve. They couldn't deny the results. She possessed an intimate, detailed knowledge of the Temple of Seti I and the surrounding area during the exact time frame she claimed to have lived there as Bentreshit. They simply could not explain how she knew what she knew. Right before she passed away at the age of 81, Seti shared one final secret. She said that deep beneath the Temple of Seti I, there is a secret chamber. And inside that chamber, there is another secret, a library of records or a hidden tomb, something of incredible importance. But she passed away before she could give more specific directions. No one knows exactly where to begin looking. And so, without Seti to guide them, her final secret may be one that is lost to time. Her story leaves us with so many questions. Without any logical, rational explanation for her knowledge, for her ability to pinpoint lost gardens and secret tunnels, even skeptics are left to wonder. Was she a brilliant hoaxer who somehow found lost information that no one else could? Or was Dorothy Eady, the little girl from London, truly the reincarnation of a priestess from ancient Egypt? Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. Sometimes the most frightening stories are not the ones about monsters hiding in the dark or shadowy figures in the woods. They are the stories that start in the most ordinary of places. A radio station, a military ship, a county jail. They involve regular people making what seem like small decisions, but those decisions create ripples that spiral into something truly unbelievable and often tragic. Today we're looking at 3 stories where a simple choice, a fun contest, and a routine arrest went horribly wrong. One is a story of incredible laziness, another of a game that turned deadly, and the last is a story of a man being completely forgotten by the world. To do this first story justice, it has to be told in the first person. So just know, for this part, I am simply an actor relaying someone else's experience. I was on a U.S. military ship sitting in the wardroom. The wardroom is basically the officer's lounge, a place to grab a coffee or a bite to eat. It was early morning, and the operations officer came stumbling in. This guy was the absolute definition of not a morning person. He was bleary-eyed, moving like a zombie, and clutching a bagel in his hand. He sits down at the table directly across from me, barely conscious, and starts gnawing on his breakfast. I was sitting with my back to the outboard side of the ship, which is the outside wall. Right next to my head was a porthole, and the morning sun was beaming through it. The light cut right across the room and was hitting this officer directly in his face. He's squinting, trying to block the sun with his hand, looking totally miserable. I'm just watching him, expecting him to do the logical thing and just shift his chair a few inches to the left or right to get out of the sun's path. But he doesn't. Instead, this officer slowly, and I mean slowly, reaches for the phone that was mounted on the wall. He picks up the receiver, brings it to his ear, and in a groggy voice he says, "Yeah, bridge!" Yeah, this is ops. "I need you to adjust our path." He pauses for a second. "Yeah, 156. Yep, that's about right." "Okay. All right, bye." He hangs up the phone and just sits there. He hasn't moved an inch. He's still squinting, looking up at the sunlight that's blazing on his face. I'm looking back and forth between him and the porthole, trying to figure out what just happened. And then I see it. The circle of light from the porthole gradually begins to shift off of him. It moves across the table, onto the wall behind him, and then it just stops. By ordering the bridge to change the ship's course by about 15 degrees, he had changed the ship's position just enough to move the sun off his face. He literally redirected thousands of tons of steel and a crew of hundreds of people just because he was too lazy to move his chair. I was in total awe. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. For a second, I worried that the sheer, unbelievable brilliance of this move was lost on him in his tired state. But then, as I'm just staring at him, he takes a bite of his bagel, looks up at me, and gives me a little smile before going right back to his breakfast. In November of 2006, Nintendo released a brand new gaming console. It was called the Wii, and it was an absolute sensation. It was so popular that it sold out almost completely right away. By January of the next year, you still couldn't find one on the shelves in most places around the world. People were going crazy, spending unbelievable amounts of money online just to get their hands on one. A radio station in Sacramento, California called KDND managed to get a hold of one of these coveted systems. They decided they would give it away as a prize in an on-air contest. The contest had a catchy, if a bit silly, name. It was called Hold Your Wee for a Wee. The premise was simple. Contestants would be given lots and lots of water to drink. The person who could hold it the longest, meaning they didn't go to the bathroom to urinate, would win the brand new Nintendo Wii. In the days leading up to the contest, the radio station promoted it very aggressively on the air. As they did, lots of concerned listeners started calling in. They warned the station that drinking too much water too quickly can actually be deadly, but the station just brushed these concerns off. The on-air personalities said they were aware of the risks and that all the contestants would be signing a waiver. This waiver, they claimed, meant the station was not responsible for whatever happened to them. On the morning of Friday, January 12th, 18 contestants showed up at the KDND radio station. They were all led into a room and handed their waivers to sign. One contestant later said the waiver only seemed to cover publicity issues, not anything about health and safety. One of the people there that day was a 28-year-old woman named Jennifer Strange. Jennifer was a mother of 3, and she was there trying to win this Wii for her kids. She, along with everyone else, signed the paper and was then ushered into the contest room. The rules were laid out. They were each handed an 8-ounce bottle of water. Every 15 minutes, they were expected to finish that water bottle. If they couldn't finish it in time, or if they got up to use the bathroom at any point, they were out of the contest. The contest officially started at 6:45 a.m. By 8 a.m., after 5 bottles of water had been consumed, a number of contestants had already pulled themselves out of the game to use the bathroom. The radio staff, however, felt like the contest was moving too slowly. So, to speed things up, they gave the remaining contestants, including Jennifer, a larger bottle of water to drink from. Over the next several hours, all of the contestants, except for Jennifer and one other person, had dropped out. The pain was just too much. They had to go to the bathroom. Jennifer was heard on the air, her voice strained, saying that it hurt so much. One of the radio hosts just laughed and said, "Well, do you need to lay down?" Then someone else piped up and said, "She can't even walk." And the room just filled with laughter, and nobody did anything. Around this time, a nurse who was listening to the broadcast called into the station. She very emphatically told them that what they were doing was a really, really bad idea. She said, "You're going to get someone killed from water intoxication." Water intoxication, also known as water poisoning, is a very real and dangerous condition. In a nutshell, when you drink way too much water in a short period of time, it dilutes the sodium levels in your bloodstream. This can cause your cells, including your brain cells, to swell up. This swelling can lead to comas, seizures, and even death. The host, after hearing this nurse's very serious concern, just turned away from the phone and yelled to the contestants, "Hey, is anybody dying out there?" Then he just laughed and hung up on the nurse. A little while later, you can hear one of the hosts on the broadcast commenting on how Jennifer's belly looked really strange. It had become totally distended and bloated. They joked that it looked like she was pregnant. At some point, both Jennifer and the other remaining contestant started vomiting. But instead of dropping out of the contest, they just continued to drink more water, determined not to go to the bathroom. But finally, the pain became too much for Jennifer to bear. She dropped out of the contest, and she finally relieved herself. For coming in second place, she was given tickets to a Justin Timberlake concert. On her drive home from the radio station, Jennifer began experiencing a horrific headache. It was so bad that she was just sobbing uncontrollably. Through her tears, she called one of her coworkers and told her she wasn't going to be able to make it into work that day. Her head just hurt too much. After she hung up, the coworker she had just spoken to was really concerned about her. She decided to call Jennifer's mother to let her know what was going on. About an hour later, Jennifer's mother headed over to Jennifer's house to check on her. When she got there, she found Jennifer dead in her bathroom. She had died from water poisoning. The station was ultimately sued by Jennifer's family. A jury found the station was negligent, and they were ordered to pay over $16 million in damages. In 2005, a 57-year-old man named Stephen Slevin was physically a healthy man, but mentally he was really struggling. He was depressed and felt like his life didn't have any purpose anymore. So, in August of that year, he decided to just get in his car and go on a road trip. He didn't have a destination. He just felt like if he could get out on the open road and just go somewhere, anywhere, he might start to feel better. On this road trip, he eventually began drinking alcohol. Before long, he was swerving along a New Mexico highway. A police officer saw his erratic driving and pulled him over. Once Stephen failed his sobriety test, the police officer arrested him for a DWI. Stephen was brought to a local detention center. During his booking process, it was discovered that he had a history of mental illness. So the officers, following that county's policy, decided to segregate him from the rest of the general population. In an effort to protect Stephen from himself, they moved him into a padded cell on the first floor. They removed all of his clothing and put him in what's called a suicide smock. It looks kind of like a big, thick blanket that's wrapped around your upper body. It keeps inmates warm and modest, but it also prevents them from being able to ball up their clothes to create a noose they could hurt themselves with. After a few days in this padded cell, Stephen was moved to a better cell. This one had a window, a shower, and a toilet. He was kept there for 2 weeks under strict medical observation. But at the end of those 2 weeks, for reasons that are still not entirely clear, Stephen, this mentally unstable man, was moved into solitary confinement to await his trial for the DWI. Solitary confinement is a type of imprisonment where an inmate is put into a single-person cell and they are kept there nearly around the clock, without any significant human interaction. The psychological effects of solitary confinement are well documented and they are terrifying. Just 15 days in solitary can be enough to cause permanent psychological damage. Stephen's first few weeks in solitary were actually okay. He was allowed to write to his family, and he was able to detox and reflect on his life. During those first few weeks, it was noted in the records that Stephen was very polite in his very limited interactions with the officers who were dropping food off through the slot in his door. Also, when Stephen had a few minor medical issues, instead of throwing a fit, he would just knock on the inside of his door and wait patiently for someone to acknowledge him. This often took a long time, but he never got frustrated or angry. But by January of 2006, so roughly 3 months into his solitary stint, Stephen had not received any updates on when his case was going to go to trial. And he was starting to lose his grip on reality. He was having these severe panic attacks, and he was suffering from intense hallucinations. He desperately wanted to find out how much longer he was going to be kept in that cell, but nobody would tell him anything. He tried writing letters to his family, asking them for help, or asking them to try to get an update on his case. But when he went to actually write the letters, his hands would shake so severely from the stress and anxiety that he literally could not write. Starting that January, Stephen began spending the bulk of his day huddled in the corner of his cell with his knees tucked up to his chest, just rocking back and forth. He was supposed to be allowed out of his cell a few times a month, but in April of that year, that stopped. He almost never left his cell again. And without ever leaving his cell, Stephen was unable to bathe. His skin began to develop a fungus and started to fall off in patches. His fingernails grew long and curled. His teeth began to rot. Finally, on the 8th of May 2007, after 1 year and 8 months of being in solitary confinement, Stephen was transferred out of his cell to a behavioral institute in Las Vegas, Nevada. After bathing and shaving and getting his hair cut and receiving proper medical treatment, he was back to his normal self within a couple of days. While he was there, he had a chance to speak to a lawyer. The lawyer would later say that during their entire meeting, Stephen just kept asking, "Where have I been?" The lawyer explained to him, You've been in solitary confinement, awaiting trial. You've been there for almost 2 years. Stephen was shocked. He literally didn't believe him. He actually couldn't remember that huge chunk of his life. It was as if his mind, to protect itself, had completely repressed the trauma. But as the lawyer told him more about it, it began to come back to him in flashes. He begged the lawyer to not let them send him back to that solitary confinement cell. The lawyer said, "Unfortunately, if that's where they decide to keep you, that's where you'll be until you have your trial. And we have no idea when that trial is going to be. But stay strong. It's bound to be soon." Stephen stayed at the Institute for 2 weeks. During that time, he asked constantly about when his trial was going to happen, but nobody knew. And at the end of those 2 weeks, Stephen was abruptly taken from his room, put in a van, driven back to New Mexico, and put right back into his solitary confinement cell. Immediately, Stephen began to deteriorate again. He begged the guards not to put him back in there, but nobody was listening. And before long, the heavy steel door had shut, and he was all alone again. Within a couple of days, Stephen developed a painful abscess in one of his teeth. He tried to get medical attention, but he was ignored. So he sat in the corner of his cell, and for 8 straight hours one day, he rocked back and forth and violently twisted and yanked and pulled on that infected tooth until he was able to rip it out of his own head. Almost 2 months later, on the 22nd of June 2007, Stephen's case was finally put before a judge. The judge immediately dismissed all of the charges against him. It's believed the judge had found out about the horrible mistreatment Stephen had endured and took pity on him, but we will never know for sure. 3 days later, Stephen was released from jail and reunited with his family. He had been in solitary confinement for 2 years without so much as a single hearing to tell him what was going on with his case. He had essentially been completely forgotten about. He would go on to sue the county, and he won $15.5 million in damages. However, at the same time he was winning this case, he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and given less than a year to live. It is unclear if he is still alive today. 3 completely different stories, but they all show how fragile our own worlds can be. How a moment of extreme laziness, a terrible lapse in judgment during a contest, or a crack in the system that's supposed to protect us can change everything forever. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes the real horror isn't some external force, but the devastating consequences of very human decisions. 3 stories. 3 ordinary places. 3 decisions that never should have mattered until they did. Because what makes these stories unsettling isn't just what happened, it's how easily it all began. A small choice. A moment of carelessness. A system that didn't react in time. And suddenly, everything changed. Until next time.